The galactic survey ship Eternal Seeker dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Carina Nebula, its sensors immediately beginning their standard sweep of the system. Chief Observer Zax 427, a crystalline being from the Silicon Concordat, noticed something unusual in the readings from the third planet. Captain Mira, we have an anomaly. Zax's crystalline form pulsed with blue light as they spoke. The readings from PC 742-3 show impossible contradictions. Captain Mira, a towering Arcturian with iridescent scales, glided across the bridge to examine the readings herself. The planet before them shouldn't have supported any life at all. Its atmosphere was a toxic soup of chlorine and sulfur compounds. Its surface temperature averaged 150 degrees Celsius, and acid rain regularly scored its rocky surface. What kind of contradictions? Mira's facial tendrils twitched with curiosity. Organic patterns, Captain. Complex ones. And Zax 427 paused, their crystalline structure flickering with disbelief. Artificial structures. Someone or something is living down there. The bridge crew fell silent. According to all known biological science, nothing should have been able to survive in such conditions without massive environmental shielding. Yet the readings were clear. There was activity on the surface. Launch probe series Alpha through Delta, Mira ordered. Full spectrum analysis. The probes descended through the caustic atmosphere, their sensors gathering data that only deepened the mystery. There were indeed structures on the surface, crude by galactic standards, but remarkably resilient to the hostile environment. More importantly, they showed signs of recent modification and maintenance. Captain, Zax's voice carried an unusual tremor. We're detecting a communication signal. It's in standard galactic English. The signal crackled through the ship's communication system. This is Dr. Sarah Chen of Earth, sole survivor of research vessel Hawking. If you're receiving this, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to find this place. Welcome to what I call New Darwin. It's not much, but it's home. Captain Mira's scales shifted to a pale blue of shock. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as an adaptable species, but this was beyond anything previously documented. The last known human presence in this sector had been the disappearance of the research vessel Hawking during a routine survey mission. Open a channel, Mira ordered, her voice steady despite her astonishment. Dr. Chen, this is Captain Mira of the galactic survey ship Eternal Seeker. Your survival is unexpected. Our readings suggest the environment there is lethal to carbon-based life. A laugh came through the channel, slightly distorted by the atmospheric interference. Oh, it was. Still is, by most standards. But you'd be amazed what the human body can adapt to with the right modifications and a lot of determination. The survey ship's sensors continued to gather data as they spoke. They showed a network of interconnected structures built into the side of a mountain, protected from the worst of the acid storms. Nearby, there were what appeared to be agricultural zones, though what could possibly grow in such conditions was beyond the crew's understanding. Request permission to send a landing party, Mira said, her scientific curiosity overriding standard protocol. We need to document this. The Galactic Scientific Council will want to understand how you've achieved the impossible. Permission granted, Sarah replied, but you'll need to follow my docking protocols exactly. I've learned the hard way how to handle this atmosphere. I'm transmitting them now. And Captain, bring extra environmental suits, the ones rated for extreme conditions. You're going to need them. As the Eternal Seeker moved into orbit, the crew began preparations for contact. Their standard environmental suits were quickly deemed insufficient after reviewing Dr. Chen's data. The atmosphere wasn't just toxic, it was corrosive enough to eat through standard protective materials in minutes. The landing party, consisting of Captain Mira, Zax 427, and their chief medical officer Dr. Lan, descended in a heavily shielded shuttle. As they approached the surface, they got their first clear view of what Sarah Chen had built. The settlement was a testament to human ingenuity. Solar collectors, modified to withstand the caustic environment, powered atmospheric processors, Greenhouse domes contained plants that shouldn't have been able to survive, yet were thriving. And at the center of it all was a landing pad, built to exact galactic survey specifications, despite being constructed from locally sourced materials. As they landed, their shuttle's external sensors registered something else extraordinary. The atmosphere immediately around the settlement was different, still toxic by most standards, but noticeably less lethal than the surrounding air. The airlock cycle took 3 times longer than standard procedure, involving multiple decontamination stages. When it finally opened, they found themselves face to face with Dr. Sarah Chen. She stood before them in what appeared to be a modified environmental suit, far more streamlined than their own bulky protection. "Welcome to New Darwin," she said, her voice clear through their comm systems. "Sorry about all the precautions, but this place doesn't forgive mistakes. I learned it the hard way when we first crashed here." Captain Mira's scanner showed something impossible. The human before them wasn't wearing a full environmental suit at all. Some kind of breathing apparatus covered the lower half of her face, but her skin was exposed to the atmosphere, protected only by a thin, transparent film that seemed to be secreted by her own body. "How?" was all Zax 427 could manage to say, their crystalline form flickering with confusion. Sarah smiled behind her breathing mask. "That's a long story. One that starts with a crash, continues through several near-death experiences, and involves a lot of desperate genetic modification. But the short version, this planet didn't kill me. It changed me, and in return, I'm changing it." She gestured to the surrounding settlement. "What you're seeing isn't just survival. It's the beginning of terraforming, but not the way we usually do it, forcing a planet to adapt to us. Instead, I learned to adapt to it. And now I'm teaching it to meet me halfway." The implications were staggering. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy had their list of impossible planets, worlds that could never be colonized due to extreme conditions. Yet here was a single human, not just surviving, but thriving on one of the most hostile worlds ever cataloged. "The Galactic Council will want to study this," Captain Mira said, her scales shifting through patterns of excitement and concern. "This could revolutionize our understanding of planetary adaptation." Sarah's expression grew serious. "I'll share what I've learned, but on one condition. This stays under galactic scientific protection protocols. I've seen what happens when corporations get their hands on breakthrough technology. This isn't just about profit. It's about learning to work with worlds we thought were dead. Every planet has potential. We just have to be willing to change ourselves to meet it halfway." As the landing party followed Sarah into her settlement, they couldn't help but feel they were witnessing the beginning of a new era in galactic exploration. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of what was possible, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. 3 years earlier, the research vessel Hawking tumbled through the atmosphere of PC 742-3, its hull screaming under the assault of corrosive gases. In the ship's laboratory, Dr. Sarah Chen worked frantically to secure her experimental samples as alarms blared throughout the vessel. "Core containment failing," the ship's AI announced. "Impact imminent. All crew to emergency pods." Sarah knew they wouldn't make it to the pods. The ship's structural integrity was failing too quickly, and the atmosphere was eating through their shields faster than anyone had predicted. She made a split-second decision that would change her life forever. "Computer, seal the lab. Emergency protocol Chen Alpha." The laboratory doors slammed shut as Sarah grabbed her experimental genetic modification unit, a prototype she'd been developing for extreme environment adaptation. She'd never intended to test it on herself, but now she had no choice. The ship struck the surface with devastating force. The last thing Sarah remembered was pushing the injector against her neck as the world turned sideways and everything went black. She awoke to pain, searing, all-encompassing pain. The lab was partially crushed, emergency force field generators barely holding back the toxic atmosphere. Her skin felt like it was on fire, and every breath burned in her lungs. The genetic modification was working, but not fast enough. Sarah dragged herself to her feet, fighting through the agony. Her vision swam as she accessed what remained of the ship's computer. No signs of other survivors. The rest of the crew. She pushed the thought aside. She couldn't help them now. She had to focus on staying alive. The modification unit was still functioning, its display showing the progress of her transformation. Her cells were rapidly mutating, trying to adapt to the hostile environment. She needed to buy them time. Using the remains of her environmental suit and pieces of the lab's equipment, Sarah cobbled together a breathing apparatus. It wouldn't last long in this atmosphere, but it might give her body enough time to complete its transformation. Over the next 72 hours, Sarah experienced what it meant to be reborn. Her skin blistered and peeled, revealing the new layer beneath that secreted a protective film. Her lungs burned as they developed new structures to filter the toxic air. Her blood chemistry changed, allowing her to process elements that should have killed her. When she finally emerged from the wreckage, she was no longer entirely human. At least, not by traditional definitions. Her body had become a hybrid of human genetics and engineered adaptations. She could survive in the open air, though she still needed the breathing apparatus to help process the most toxic elements. The landscape around her was a vision of hell. Acid rain fell from yellow-green skies, sizzling against rocks that had been sculpted into bizarre formations by centuries of chemical erosion. The temperature was high enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes, but her modified body processed the heat differently now. Sarah spent the first month just learning to survive. She salvaged what she could from the wreck, setting up a basic shelter in a nearby cave system. Her scientific training became her lifeline. Every day was an experiment in adaptation. She discovered that some of the local mineral formations could be processed into building materials that resisted the corrosive atmosphere. Using salvaged equipment and her knowledge of chemistry, she began manufacturing her own construction compounds. The real breakthrough came 3 months after the crash. Sarah noticed something extraordinary. There was life here, just not in any form humans would recognize. Microscopic organisms thrived in the toxic soup of the atmosphere, using the caustic chemicals the way Earth organisms used oxygen. If they can adapt to this world, she recorded in her salvage datapad, then so can I. And maybe I can help them become something more. Sarah began experimenting with these native microorganisms, using her modified genetic engineering equipment to accelerate their evolution. She created hybrid strains that could process larger amounts of toxic elements, effectively beginning a microscopic terraforming project. The first year was the hardest. Every day was a struggle to maintain her shelter, find energy sources, and continue her research. But gradually, things began to change. The hybrid microorganisms she released into the atmosphere around her settlement began to create a slightly less toxic microclimate. Using these adapted organisms as a foundation, Sarah started her first greenhouse. The plants were heavily modified versions of Earth species, designed to work in concert with the local microorganisms. They weren't pretty. Their leaves were thick and twisted, their colors ranging from deep purple to slate gray. But they grew. By the end of the second year, Sarah had expanded her settlement significantly. Solar collectors powered atmospheric processors that worked alongside her engineered organisms to create breathable zones. She had established a sustainable food source through her modified plants, and her body had continued to adapt and evolve. She built a communications array from salvaged parts, broadcasting a steady signal into space. But as time passed, she realized something had changed within her. She no longer dreamed of rescue. She dreamed of discovery. She wanted others to see what she had learned, how humanity could adapt to worlds they had dismissed as dead. The acid rains became her shower, the toxic winds her breath. She learned to read the patterns in the caustic storms, to predict and use them rather than hide from them. This world that had nearly killed her had become something else. It had become home. When she wasn't working on survival and expansion, Sarah documented everything. Every adaptation, every discovery, every failure and success. She knew that if anyone ever found her, this information would be invaluable. It wasn't just about surviving on this one world. It was about opening up countless worlds that had been deemed uninhabitable. As her third year on the planet drew to a close, Sarah stood at the entrance of her settlement, watching an acid storm paint the sky in shades of amber and green. Her body had continued to evolve, developing new adaptations she hadn't consciously engineered. Her skin had taken on a slightly iridescent quality, better reflecting the harsh sunlight. Her eyes had developed a second, transparent lid to protect against the caustic atmosphere. She was no longer the same person who had crashed here 3 years ago. This world had changed her, rebuilt her, taught her that adaptation was not just about survival. It was about finding new ways to thrive. The distant sound of an entering ship caught her attention. As she watched the galactic survey vessel descend through the atmosphere, Sarah smiled behind her breathing apparatus. Now came the real test, not of survival, but of vision. Could she make others understand that what they saw as a dead world was really a new frontier of human potential? As she prepared to meet her visitors, Sarah ran a hand along the wall of her settlement. The surface felt alive under her touch, a testament to how far she'd come from those desperate first days. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a pioneer, and she was about to show the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their determination. It was their ability to change. The Galactic Survey team stood in Sarah's primary research lab, their environmental suits reflecting the purple glow of cultivation tanks that lined the walls. Inside each tank, different strains of modified organisms swirled and pulsed, each one representing a step in Sarah's grand experiment. These are the fourth-generation atmospheric processors, Sarah explained, tapping one of the tanks. The liquid inside swirled with bioluminescent life. They're not just surviving in the toxic atmosphere anymore. They're actively transforming it. Zax 427's crystalline form sparkled with interest as they studied the readouts. The chemical conversion rates are unprecedented. These organisms are breaking down complex toxic compounds and reconstructing them into breathable elements. That's just the beginning, Sarah said, leading them to a larger chamber. This is what I call the Genesis Garden. The chamber was filled with plants unlike anything the survey team had ever seen. Some had metallic-looking leaves that shifted and adjusted their position constantly. Others seemed to pulse with internal light, their root systems glowing through transparent soil containers. These aren't just adapted Earth species, Dr. Lan observed, his medical scanners working overtime to analyze the strange flora. You've created entirely new forms of plant life. Sarah nodded, pride evident in her voice. They're hybrids. I combined Earth plant genetics with local microbial life. The results were unexpected. These plants don't just tolerate the toxic environment. They thrive on it. They're actively processing the poisons and converting them into nutrients. Captain Mira moved closer to one of the plants, watching as its leaves tracked her movement. They're responsive to presence, conscious. In a way, Sarah confirmed. The hostile environment here required something more than passive adaptation. These plants had to evolve active defense and processing mechanisms. They're more like colonies of coordinated organisms than traditional plants. She led them to a monitoring station where multiple screens displayed data from around the planet. But the real transformation is happening on a larger scale. Watch this. The main screen showed a time-lapse view of the area around Sarah's settlement over the past year. The characteristic yellow-green haze of the toxic atmosphere had gradually given way to patches of clearer air. More surprisingly, the bare rock had begun to show signs of change. The hybrid organisms are spreading, Sarah explained. As they process the toxic elements, they're creating new compounds that break down the rock into soil. It's a cascade effect. Each generation of organisms makes the environment more suitable for the next. You're terraforming the planet, Zax 427 stated, their crystalline form pulsing with realization. Not exactly, Sarah corrected. Traditional terraforming tries to force a planet to become like Earth. This is something different. I'm helping the planet find a new balance, one that includes space for Earth life, but doesn't erase what makes this world unique. She pulled up another set of data, showing the spread of her hybrid organisms across the planet's surface. The toxic atmosphere, the extreme temperatures, these aren't just obstacles to overcome. They're energy sources, raw materials for a new kind of biosphere. Dr. Land's medical scanner suddenly beeped urgently. Dr. Chen, your cellular structure, it's still evolving. Sarah smiled behind her breathing apparatus. Yes, that's the other part of this transformation. I'm not just changing the planet, it's changing me. My body is continuing to adapt, finding new ways to interact with this environment. The genetic modifications I used to survive have taken on a life of their own. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing skin that seemed to shimmer with a metallic sheen. My body now produces compounds similar to what these plants use. I can process some of the toxic elements directly, use them for energy. I'm becoming part of this world's ecosystem. Captain Mira's scales shifted to a deep blue of concern. The Galactic Council will want to study this thoroughly. The implications for colonization, for adaptation to extreme environments, are revolutionary, Sarah finished, but also dangerous in the wrong hands. This isn't just about exploiting new worlds. It's about learning to become part of them. She led them to a viewing window that overlooked a vast expanse of the transformed landscape. In the distance, patches of alien vegetation had begun to appear, their metallic leaves catching the light of the setting sun. Look there. Sarah pointed to where a group of her hybrid plants had taken root in a natural formation. They're not just surviving anymore. They're creating niches for new forms of life. The planet's own ecosystem is beginning to respond, to adapt alongside my introduced species. The survey team watched in amazement as a local creature, something like a cross between a lizard and a living crystal, scuttled across the modified vegetation. Its body seemed perfectly adapted to the hybrid environment, neither fully of the old world nor entirely new. That's what I've been trying to achieve, Sarah explained. Not conquest, not replacement, but synthesis. A new kind of life that honors both where we came from and where we are. As if to emphasize her point, an acid storm rolled in from the horizon. But instead of destroying the new growth, the caustic rain was absorbed by the hybrid plants, feeding their complex chemical processes. The landscape literally glowed with transformed energy. Every planet has its own story, Sarah said, watching the storm with evident satisfaction. Its own way of being alive. We just have to learn to listen, to adapt, to become part of that story rather than trying to overwrite it. The implications of her work were staggering. Across the galaxy, thousands of worlds have been classified as uninhabitable, too hostile for colonization. But Sarah had proven that with the right approach, there were no dead worlds, only worlds waiting for the right adaptation. As the storm passed, leaving behind a landscape that pulsed with new life, Captain Mira made a decision. This discovery would change everything. Not just how humanity approached colonization, but how all spacefaring species thought about their relationship with alien worlds. The transformation of PC 742-3 was more than a scientific breakthrough. It was a glimpse of a possible future where adaptation went both ways, where life found new expressions in the most hostile environments, and where humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy might be their ability to bridge the gap between what was and what could be. News of Sarah Chen's achievements spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. Within weeks of the Eternal Seeker's report reaching the Galactic Council, ships began appearing in the system. Research vessels, corporate scouts, and diplomatic envoys, all drawn by the promise of technology that could transform dead worlds into viable colonies. Sarah watched from her observation dome as another flotilla of ships entered orbit. Her modified eyes could pick out details that would have been invisible to her original human vision. Corporate logos, weapon systems poorly disguised as scientific equipment, the subtle signs of ships built for more than peaceful exploration. "They still don't understand," she said to Captain Mira. who had chosen to remain with her small team to document the ongoing transformation. They see this as a technology to be extracted and replicated, but it's not that simple. The Arcturian captain's scales rippled with agreement. The corporate consortium has already filed 12 different patent claims relating to your work. They're trying to own the concept of biological adaptation itself. Sarah laughed, a sound that echoed strangely through her evolved vocal cords. Good luck with that. Every adaptation here is unique to this world. The principles might be universal, but the specifics— She gestured to her own transformed body. This isn't something you can package and sell. A priority communication alert flashed on their screens. The message was from the Galactic Council itself, marked with the highest level of urgency. Sarah opened the channel, and a holographic representation of the council chamber materialized in the room. The council was composed of representatives from the galaxy's major species, the crystalline silicon concordat, the energy-based Luminians, the hive-minded Jesselt, and others. At the center was High Counselor Ven, a being of pure thought contained within a matrix of light. Dr. Sarah Chen. Ven's voice resonated with artificial harmonics. Your work has created quite a stir. The Council has received multiple petitions regarding the status of PC 742-3 and your discoveries there. I imagine they have, Sarah replied calmly. Let me guess. The corporate consortium wants to claim my adaptation techniques as proprietary technology. The Colonization Authority wants to classify this as a pilot program for their expansion initiatives. And probably half a dozen species have suddenly discovered ancient historical claims to this system. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. Sarah had summarized their next 3 agenda items perfectly. The situation is complex, Ven acknowledged. Your methods of adaptation and environmental transformation could revolutionize colonization efforts across the galaxy. Many parties feel such knowledge should not remain in the hands of a single individual. Sarah moved closer to the holographic projection, her modified skin refracting light in patterns that caught the council's attention. With respect, High Counselor, you're still thinking about this the wrong way. What's happening here isn't a technology to be copied. It's a relationship. She waved her hand, and the room's environmental controls shifted. The atmosphere became more like the outside, caustic and hot by human standards. The council members' holographic representations flickered with surprise as their sensors registered the change. I could give you my complete genetic sequence, every detail of how I modified these organisms, all my research notes, Sarah continued, moving comfortably through the toxic air. But it wouldn't help you colonize another world like this, because what's happening here is a dialogue between life and planet, between adaptation and environment. Each world needs its own conversation. A new ship appeared in orbit, its design marking it as belonging to the corporate consortium. Sarah's sensors detected multiple drops from the vessel, unauthorized landing craft heading for various points around the planet. And it seems some people need a more practical demonstration of this principle, she said grimly. Captain Mira, if you would. The Arcturian activated a control panel, and across the planet's surface, the hybrid ecosystem responded. The corporate landing craft found themselves engulfed in clouds of modified organisms, not attacking, but simply responding to the invasion of their space. Within minutes, the craft's external sensors were obscured, their landing systems compromised by rapidly evolving microbes that had learned to feed on certain types of energy emissions. As you can see, Sarah addressed the council. This world's defenses aren't weapons or shields. They're living systems that adapt to protect themselves. I didn't design them to do that. They evolved that capability because it was needed. The corporate landing craft retreated, their hulls already showing signs of interaction with the planet's new ecosystem. In orbit, the consortium ship quickly backed away from the planet. I spent 3 years becoming part of this world, Sarah continued. The adaptations in my body, in these organisms, they're not just random changes. They're responses to this specific environment, this specific context. Try to transfer them somewhere else, and they'll either fail or evolve into something completely different. High Counselor Vensform pulsed thoughtfully. You are suggesting that each world requiring adaptation needs its own pioneers, Sarah finished. People willing to take the time to understand the planet, to become part of its system rather than trying to force it into a predetermined mold. This isn't about claiming worlds or exploiting resources. It's about learning to have a conversation with environments we thought were dead. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Sarah's words challenged centuries of colonization doctrine, suggesting a completely new approach to expanding into the galaxy. There will be resistance to this idea, Captain Mira observed quietly. Many powerful entities have built their fortunes on traditional terraforming and colonization methods. Sarah nodded, watching as another corporate ship arrived in orbit, only to back away when its sensors detected the planet's evolved defenses. Let them resist. This world has taught me patience. Every toxic storm, every caustic rain. They're all part of the conversation. The galaxy will learn, just as I did, that true adaptation isn't about conquest. It's about becoming part of something larger than ourselves. As if in response to her words, the hybrid plants around the settlement began their evening phosphorescence, filling the caustic air with points of living light. The sight caused several council members to fall silent in wonder. "This is your formal notice to the council," Sarah said, her transformed voice carrying new harmonics that resonated with authority. PC 742-3, which I call New Darwin, is not a resource to be claimed. It's a pioneer world, a teaching world. Anyone willing to learn its lessons, to undergo true adaptation, is welcome here. Anyone seeking to exploit it will find that this world now knows how to defend itself. The Council's response would shape the future of galactic expansion. But as Sarah looked out over her transformed home, watching the interplay of toxic storms and evolved life, she knew the real change had already begun. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had always known deep down, that the key to thriving in hostile environments wasn't about making them submit to you, but about learning to dance with their darkness until it became your light. 5 years later, the observation platform of the new Darwin Academy of Adaptive Sciences hung suspended in the caustic atmosphere, its transparent walls offering a panoramic view of the transformed landscape below. Sarah Chen stood before a group of students from across the galaxy, her evolved form a living testament to the principles she taught. "Adaptation isn't about conquering a world," she said, her modified voice carrying easily through the specialized atmosphere. "It's about joining its story." Her students were as diverse as the environments they hoped to pioneer. A young Arcturian whose scales showed signs of early modification, a silicon concordat researcher whose crystalline form had already begun incorporating local minerals, and even a few humans, their bodies beginning the long process of transformation that Sarah had undergone years before. Below them, the surface of New Darwin demonstrated the success of her approach. The once barren landscape now pulsed with hybrid life. Metallic plants swayed in toxic winds, their leaves converting caustic chemicals into energy. Crystalline creatures skittered across fields of modified vegetation, part of a completely new ecosystem that bridged the gap between Earth life and the planet's native biochemistry. "Each of you," Sarah continued, "will face different challenges on your chosen worlds. The ice plains of Epsilon Eridani, the methane seas of Titan, the plasma storms of the Carina Nebula. These aren't obstacles to be overcome. They're partners in a dialogue of adaptation." A holographic display activated, showing dozens of worlds across the galaxy where Sarah's students had begun their own projects. On each planet, unique forms of hybrid life were taking root, guided by pioneers who understood that true colonization meant becoming part of a world's existing systems rather than imposing their own. The Galactic Council's declaration of the Adaptive Worlds Protocol last year wasn't just a policy change, Sarah explained. It was a recognition that we've entered a new era of exploration. The old methods of terraforming, brute force transformation of environments to suit our needs, are being replaced by something more subtle, more profound. She gestured to her own transformed body. "Look at me. I'm not just a human who survived this world. I'm a bridge between what humanity was and what it can become. Each of you will become similar bridges on your own worlds, unique adaptations that prove life finds a way not by conquering hostile environments, but by learning to dance with them. The Academy sensors detected a new arrival in orbit. Another research vessel, this one bearing the marks of multiple species scientific institutions. Since the establishment of the Adaptive Worlds Protocol, New Darwin had become a beacon for researchers studying the frontiers of biological adaptation. The corporate interests haven't given up. One of the human students noted, watching as the ship took up a careful orbit. They're still trying to find ways to package and sell what we're doing here. Sarah smiled, her expression visible through skin that had become slightly translucent. Let them try. They're still thinking in terms of products and patents. What we're doing here can't be bottled and sold. It's a process, a journey that's different for every world and every pioneer. She led her students to the genetics lab, where the latest generation of hybrid organisms were being cultivated. These adaptations aren't just random mutations. They're conversations with the environment, responses to the specific challenges each world presents. You can't take what worked here and apply it directly somewhere else. You have to listen to your world, learn its rhythms, understand its needs. The lab's displays showed the progress of adaptation projects across the galaxy. On a frozen world in the Outer Rim, a pioneer was developing symbiotic relationships with crystalline life forms that thrived in the extreme cold. In the methane seas of a gas giant's moon, another graduate of the Academy had begun the process of adapting to liquid hydrocarbon environments. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, Sarah said, watching her students examine the data, wasn't our technology or our determination. It was our adaptability, our ability to look at hostile environments and see not obstacles, but opportunities for transformation. An alert sounded, signaling the approach of one of New Darwin's characteristic acid storms. Instead of seeking shelter, Sarah led her students onto an external observation platform. The caustic winds whipped around them, but their modified bodies processed the toxins easily, drawing energy from what would have once been lethal. Feel that? Sarah asked as the storm raged around them. That's not just wind and chemicals. That's the breath of this world, the pulse of its being. Once you learn to sense that rhythm, to move with it rather than against it, you begin to understand what true adaptation means. The storm painted the sky in sheets of bioluminescence, hybrid organisms riding the currents, breaking down toxic compounds, and transforming them into new forms of energy. It was beautiful in an alien way, a demonstration of how life could find beauty in even the most hostile conditions. You're not here to learn how to survive on hostile worlds, Sarah told her students as they watched the display. You're here to learn how to become part of them. Each of you will write your own chapter in the story of your chosen world, and in doing so, you'll help expand humanity's understanding of what's possible. In orbit, the research vessel's sensors recorded the storm, its crew marveling at the complex interplay of biological and chemical processes. They, like so many others, had come seeking the secret of Sarah's success. But the real secret wasn't in her genetic modifications or her hybrid organisms. It was in the fundamental shift in perspective she represented. The understanding that true adaptation wasn't about conquering hostile environments, but about entering into a dialogue with them. About becoming something new, something that bridged the gap between what was and what could be. As the storm passed, leaving behind a landscape that glittered with transformed energy, Sarah looked at her students, the next generation of pioneers who would carry these principles to worlds across the galaxy. Each of them would face their own challenges, develop their own unique adaptations, and in doing so, continue to expand the boundaries of what life could become. The galaxy is full of worlds we once thought dead, she said finally. But there are no dead worlds. There are only worlds waiting for someone to learn their language, to join their dance, to become part of their story. That's your mission now. Not to conquer, but to connect. Not to transform, but to transcend. Above them, The toxic sky of New Darwin shimmered with possibilities, a testament to the truth that in the vast expanse of space, adaptation wasn't just about survival. It was about finding new ways to thrive, new forms of life, new definitions of what it meant to be human in a universe full of worlds waiting to share their stories.